Welcome to What's Best Forum's Masters and Makers interview series. Today we are meeting Mark Jenkins, CEO of Antipodes Audio. Mark, thank you for joining us.
Ron, how are you?
Good. How did you come to start Antipodes?
Well, I've always been into music and been an audiophile for many years. But I got very frustrated with interconnects. I built a machine to make wire, worked out how we could use all cotton insulation. After a few years, I found how much I enjoyed designing and getting feedback from end customers telling me that they loved the cable. So I eventually decided I wanted to get into this thing and out of what I was doing. And at that point, I started the R&D on music service.
Tell me about your organization. Who do you work with there?
There's about 8 of us here. My wife's involved. My daughter's involved on the IT side. We have Mark Cole, who is our COO. His background is organizations like Sony. I have Prince Pablo, who is our CIO, good coder, excellent structures, and his input to this business is relatively recent, but we're making enormous strides in that area at the moment. Oki Latif, who runs all our logistics side, manages the factory, which is quite a task. And we have Greg Bauer, who is a very gifted electronic engineer. So between myself, Greg, and Prince, we cover the technical side of the design. We tend to keep all design in-house for particular reasons. Other than those things where you need scale. Obviously, we don't make our own CPUs. But I'm a believer in keeping the technical development inside because it enables you to look across the different disciplines of computer hardware, engineering, software engineering, and the electronic engineering, and even casework design, because you'll see opportunities for innovation when you can see across all those fields.
Do you write the schematics yourself? Is it a collaborative effort among the three of you?
I tend to be the scientist, so I tend to be the one that understands where we're headed, what we're trying to achieve, where the gaps are between what the product is today and what we're trying to achieve with it, and develop the theories that seem to be the ones that are getting us to move in that direction. So therefore, I tend to drive okay, this is what we need to do next. What we're trying to achieve is this. The way I think we need to approach it is start with this and build it out like that, and see where that gets us. I tend to be the one that makes the judgment calls around, yes, that's doing it. No, that's not doing it. Let's cut that and change. The other guys are better at getting their hands dirty in their individual fields. I'm much more of a generalist. So, I've got a few degrees from various places around the world in finance, strategy, and electronics, and actually a couple of other postgraduate qualifications. I'm the generalist who likes to play the game of business and likes to look across the lot and innovate with that view rather than down a rabbit hole.
And who physically assembles the servers and the power supplies? Do you do that in-house as well?
Yes, we do. we don't seek to make everything. There's a bunch of reasons for that. For example, there's no organisation in New Zealand left that can make circuit boards at scale. The last one that we used to use was purchased by the Australian military because they'd run out of circuit board manufacturers in Australia, and they needed one in order to keep their designs secret. So there are issues like that. So we have to develop relationships around the Oceania region, where there is greater scale. There's a lot of manufacture of high-end electronics in places like Vietnam, but spilling into a number of other countries at the moment. So we need to stay on top of what's happening there. We need to develop the right relationships to get things done. But we always do the final assembly because we need to know that the quality is there.
What is your philosophy in terms of what are you trying to achieve sonically with your components when they go into your clients' homes?
Put simply, it's I want them to stop listening to the sound of their system and just start feeling the music. So that's let me say, look, that's incredibly important. You know, I've struck this myself at times with my own system. I'll sit down and go, well, you know, I think everything's sounding pretty damn good. And a couple of weeks later, I'll find I'm just not sitting down listening anymore. And that's when, or if you sit down and you want to hear that opening couple of seconds of this track and then you shift on to the next one, that tells you your system is wrong. There's something seriously wrong. If you're not sitting down and just being captivated by the music and stop thinking about the azimuth on your cartridge, everything else, unless you feel like that, there's something wrong, and you ought not to be spending a whole lot of money on a system and getting that result. So I think it's very easy to get impressed with sonic spectaculars, and digital in particular can give you a sonic spectacular, but it's quite different to re-engage somebody in the artistry of the musicians and just how that move from note to note is just so artful with the great artists. If you don't feel like there's something wrong, so that's what we aim for, and as you move up in our products, that's what you get.
On your website, you say you tune the active elements on your motherboards to reduce the noise floor. What are you tuning exactly?
Generally, it's the speed. So most of the so the thing about noise is it's not a homogeneous thing. It's a spectrum. And by the way, you know, although there's people spout numbers for jitter, it's not really about a single number for jitter. That doesn't help. It's the spectrum of the jitter. Where the frequency of the noises is really important. So there's certain places you are happy to have some noise because it's relatively benign, and there are others where it's very damaging to the music making of the system. But equally, if you given that there's a number of active elements involved in a computer audio solution, particularly one with multiple processors, the opportunity for a noise peak on one active element to coincide with another and therefore double the amount of noise, bring that noise floor up, is significant. So shifting peaks around.
I'm sorry, Mark, but what are you tuning? Are you physically moving a potentiometer to check something on a meter? You know, when your website says tuning, what are you tuning exactly?
Yeah. Okay. So when Intel comes out with a new chipset, they provide a reference diagram for how you get everything out of that chipset. The motherboard manufacturer makes choices about which things they want to use. They make choices about the layout of the circuit board. They make choices about the parts. For example, are they going to use a part that's going to have shared lanes, or are they going to have dedicated lanes? They also get a whole lot of drop downs which enable them to set certain things, like let's turn off a bunch of lanes and have this chip handle only one lane. We can also do things like change the speed at which that chip operates. So they're not necessarily run off a clock in the way that you might think, but nevertheless you can run a number of the chips at different speeds. So each of those things will shift the spectrum of the noise around.
So are you tuning sliders on a laptop to adjust the chipset, or what is exactly that you're changing or tuning?
Okay, right. Well, it's really just choosing things that Intel's provided for you to change.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't get that when you buy the motherboard, but the motherboard manufacturer does get that capability.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got to do things like stay clear of emissions limits, for example, electronic EMI, RFI emissions. But we can use that to go a lot further. So we're just choosing options that are available for each of the active chipsets.
I understand you believe that transmitting a perfect square wave to the DAC is an important part of getting the sound you want. Why is that exactly? What's the significance of a perfect square wave to you?
Okay, so if you want perfect sound coming out of your DAC, assuming the DAC chip is perfect, then you've got to provide it with a perfect square wave. If, in theory, it could have noise on it, but have infinite bandwidth, and so therefore the vertical part of the square wave would still be there, and it would be in perfect time. If you had lowish bandwidth and had zero noise, it'd look somewhere towards a sine wave, and it'd probably still have perfect timing. But as soon as you're in the real world and you've got a bit of both, then you've actually got to try and get towards perfection on both of those parameters. In the end, if the timing is poor going into the DAC, then the analog coming out the other side is poor. Now, there are some people who think about digital audio as if it were an appliance, and the standard is to just make it work. And therefore, they would argue, well, you just reclock at the DAC. That would all be fine and good if a reclock at the DAC made everything before it irrelevant. However, it doesn't. What comes out of that process is a function of what comes in before it. So therefore, you go through multiple phases of getting from an internet stream or a file to as close to a perfect square wave as you can before it goes into the DAC. And I suppose you could do that over and over and over until you weren't getting any other improvement, and were limited just by how good your power supply and your circuitry was, and real world transmission was, and then you'd finish, but that would be stupidly costly. So there's a little bit of a trade-off of the steps you go through to get it as good as you can get it, and then you give it over to the DAC.
In high-end audio, many people try to replace switch power supplies with linear power supplies. You've gone in the opposite direction, and you've done a lot of work on increasing the speed of your switched mode power supplies. What is the meaning of speed in the context of power supplies?
Right. So if you, okay, the question right at the end of that, that perfect square wave, if you want to be at 0 volt and 1 volt in virtually the same instance, then you need something that can deliver that very, very quickly. And this is important in everything in a computer. Everything in a computer actually runs better with a switch mode power supply as long as the noise isn't egregious. But designing a very low noise switch mode power supply which is possible today. I have colleagues who work in fields that require much lower noise actually than we require. And they all use switch modes these days because of what you can do with it. Yeah, the world's changed. I used to work for large um, technology businesses like telcos, broadcasting organizations, etc. And one of the things that I was often doing was leading projects to decide on which technology and vendor we were going to throw hundreds of millions of dollars at.
Okay,
And
can we just let's just focus back on
over the years, no, this is important.
okay.
The issue about the technology choice was not about that technology. The issue about the technology choice was where the R&D was going. And the thing about switch mode is that's where the R&D has been going over the last 20, 30 years. And these days, it is simply a better technology to use than linear. So 12 years ago, I was the first music server manufacturer of any size that moved from switch mode to linear. And I think we're possibly, we may not be the first, one other, I think made that change. And this is because things change. The R&D that's gone into switch mode power supplies means that with excellent design, it does take a lot, it's a lot more complex than linear. With excellent design, you can get a better result. There's no question of that. And it's far more suited to digital audio than linear is.
Interesting. I think you believe that the inability to achieve infinite bandwidth in the digital data transmission line is a source of possible degradation. But why would audio frequencies need infinite bandwidth to be reproduced accurately?
It's not about audio frequencies. Infinite bandwidth's just another way of me saying that you want to turn a sharp corner in a square wave. So as I say, I'll sometimes use speed and people will correct me and say, don't you mean bandwidth? And sometimes say bandwidth and people correct me. And it basically means the same thing as far as I'm concerned. We need, from a power supply point of view, it's speed. From the square wave point of view, being able to have a virtually vertical climb from 0 to 1 is bandwidth.
From a layman's point of view, it might seem that COBUS streaming packets of digital data wouldn't be subject to much interpretation. What do you think is the reason for the differences in sound quality among different servers?
Yeah, it's not about interpreting the data. So in digital, the digital file has amplitude information in it, not timing information. It is only telling you the time at which it wants to be played. It's not. So when people say, well, they're just bits, they're just zeros and ones, and they get from here to there perfectly well with everything else. Why not you? Well, I don't think there's a problem getting zeros and ones from point A to point B either. But that's the amplitude dimension. So if you screw up the time dimension, you can get the amplitude dimension of an analog curve perfect. But you're still going to have distorted sound because you're shrinking this way instead of doing amplitude stuff. So amplitude is easy. Digital is designed to make it easy and designed for you to get it perfect. But timing is the issue. And people sometimes say, oh, well, if it's asynchronous timing, it doesn't matter. Well, that's a little bit like saying, I'm going to chuck you the information chaotically and you figure it out, and therefore it's not a problem. Well, of course it's a problem. So when you've got a file on the computer, you can spit it out of your SSD into RAM in block mode and then deal with it from there, or you can get it in packets from a streaming service sequentially, put it into RAM and then deal with it from there. The spitting it out all in block mode very, very quickly is a little bit better from a sound quality point of view, but equally you've got a noisy interface to the SSDs with the packet way. You've got noisy network interface, and you've got some interruptions with the stuff arriving gradually. There is no formula that says one's going to sound better than the other. It's about how you treat those things, and sometimes one will sound better than the other, depending on what you've done with it.
What does the Olandra, your top of the line server, do differently than other streamers that gives the Olandra its sonic advantages?
Uh, hmm. The Eladra is just us saying, okay, if price were no object, and that's hard for us Kiwis to say because our incomes here are very low compared to the rest of the world. We enjoy the birds and the trees and the sea instead of our BMWs. But
I think you have good life expectancy down there.
yeah, look, we're pretty laid back people. But yeah, back to the question. So if we were going to do something cost no object, then while that's quite hard for us to do because we're frugal people, that's what the Eladra is. The rest of our lineup is really just saying, okay, with the K50, how can we get that down to about 2/3 of the price of the Eladra? And of course, there's some compromises in that. And then we actually break the, excuse me, I'm going to cough. We break that down into its constituent parts, which can still be used as a standalone product, but it reduces the price of entry by 50% further. So we're starting at 10, going to 20, going to 30 across the range. But it's basically using the same approach, higher quality, if you like, parts in the Eladra. In the K series, more judged, a little bit more judgment about let's not use this because we're going to get 95% of the benefit at half the cost, sort of thing. But there's no difference in the quality levels amongst the K series, even though there's price differences simply because there's less involved and so on. So that's that dimension. If you're asking what makes our music servers sound better than a competitor's music server as opposed to larger, that's a different question. I think we all, when I look at what our competitors do, we're all choosing to make different compromises and or live with different flaws.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't like to. One thing I never do is, we have a set of ethics here, and one of those things is we never criticize our competitors. So I would never want to say, look, the way these guys do it, the thing that's wrong with theirs is blah. But they could equally say the same thing about me. We all have made different compromises. We're all happy to work with a set of weaknesses that our compromises have dished up to us because that happens to be something we understand and we can work with. So I'd have to say we're all different. I think what really makes a good product, coming back to my original point about it's not necessarily about the technology, it's how you perfect it. I think it's more the skill of Nuno and Emil and myself, and I haven't met many of the others, so I don't know them personally. It's all about the skill of those individuals being able to optimize those things.
Moving from the K50 up to the Eladra, for the difference of about a third in price, as you said, what do you hear differently in the Eladra versus the K50? What should a customer expect moving up to the Eladra sonically?
Yeah, look, we've recently updated our products. Prior to that, the K50 to a larger step was a kind of a oh my god step. But over the last year, we've been looking at how we can, because the K50 was released in 2020, the larger 2022. So over the last year, we've been looking at how we could bring some of that oh my god step from the Eladra down to the K50. And we've recently released an update to the K50, which has put a couple of grand on its price. And we always, when possible, offer upgrades to existing customers. So we have K50 owners sending in their K50s to get upgraded. Now, that it used to be that there were two very significant differences between the K50 and the Aladra. The first one was now the K50 sounded just great, and when we launched the Aladra, people said, "How could it be better?" And then they heard it, they realized. So you only hear what's wrong with the K50 when you hear the Aladra. So what was wrong with the K50 is it felt like the singer who was relaxed and belting it out on the Aladra suddenly went a bit like this. So it sounded a bit strange and a little bit constricted. So that was primarily the switch from linear to switch mode, primarily, and not just going from linear switch, but going to a very smart switch mode design. However, the upgraded K50, now the singer's relaxed and everything flows beautifully. That natural flow, which enables you to just feel the music, is there for the K50.
Okay, so from to your ears, when you compare the Eladra to the K50, it's mainly a sense of greater relaxation and natural. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm asking you, other than "Oh my God," how do you describe the sonic differences?
Yeah, I'm making it complicated by talking about where it was rather than where it is. So that where it is from the 1st of August, I wanted to cover where it was because that's what people have experienced.
Mm-hmm.
The K50 that's out there and the Aladra that's out there. With the new K50, which launches early August, and people are getting upgraded to, that gets that flow of the Aladra. And it gets a lovely sort of juicy musicality that's incredibly engaging. And sitting here listening to it, I go, God, I just love this. This is great. And then I go back to the Aladra, and the Aladra is just a different beast. Suddenly, instead of this lovely music coming at you that you're engaged with, you got all of that, but it's just laid out in front of you. The images are so much more real, like you put the glasses on, and there's greater soundstage depth, which tells you that the precision of the very fine detail is greater. Everything is better resolved, and therefore that feeling of being completely natural. So we talked a little bit earlier about the feel of the music. So the way the air brain works, that when you get the timbres right, or timbre, depending on whether you want to speak French or not, but the timbres right of all the instruments, the brain stops having to do so much work to continually work out what am I listening to, because that's part of our survival instincts. And therefore you're getting closer to the emotive reaction. Now I know what I'm listening to, what's my emotive reaction to it? So you can simply get greater emotional involvement with the Aladra than you can with even the updated K50. Even though the K50 has an absolutely gorgeous sound to it, it doesn't have that sheer resolution, naturalness, depth, and just that's, can't imagine how in reality it sounds any different from that kind of feeling that the Aladra gets you.
Do different power cords between the wall and your power supplies affect the sound out of the server?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very important. The other thing that people need to get with servers is treat them like a power amplifier. Give them lots of juice. So we've had a few customers who've gone from a low-powered Antipodes music server and then moved up to a K50 or an a larger. Said, God, this is the worst decision I've ever made. It sounds worse. And we quiz them a bit, and yep, they burned it in, and they say, what do you got it plugged into? And they've plugged it into a low power um, outlet on a conditioner that's been designed for a preamp or something like this. And I go, look, go straight into the wall or put it in, if you've got a spare one that was suitable for your power and plug into that. And I go, oh my God, whoa, now I know why I bought this. And so treat it like a power amp. Similarly with your support of it, treat it a little bit more like a power amp. It responds to vibrations a little bit more the way a power amp does than, say, a preamp or a deck does. So,
What loudspeakers and amplifier do you use in your system there to design and evaluate the servers?
we have, okay, simple answer. We use MSB in one system and Solution in another.
Mm-hmm.
For electronics, and we use Martin loudspeakers and um, some of my own.
What's going on in your research department? After the upgrades, what's the next new product we should expect from Antipodes?
Oh, I certainly can't tell you that.
I won't tell anybody.
Well, all you'll do is kill my sales till we do it. And but look, there is a next product. There always is. I know exactly what it physically looks like. I know the components sizes that are going into it. There's one completely uninvented part to it.
Mark, thank you very much for your insights into the company and the design process and the products. Really appreciate it.
Great.
Thank
Good
you.
to talk to you. Okay.
And if you've enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to our What's Best For 'em YouTube channel.